I think it should cost less. I mean, I applied to 70 programs and I spent like just under $2,000 because it gets more expensive the more you add, which is supposed to be a deterrent, but it's not because I'm going to spend any amount of money to secure my livelihood.
Welcome back to another episode of the podcast for doctors by doctors. I'm Dr. Michael Jerkins, your host for today. Unfortunately, do not have Dr. Ned Palmer with us, but I'll try to make do without him. But we are very excited about this episode because I like to try to understand what's happening with a very important season for doctors. That's the match, and understanding what it takes in 2024 and class of 2025 to apply, to interview, to end up matching, and what the scramble, it's not called the scramble anymore, is like. And I know what it was like in my day, but it's very different now, I think, with things like signaling and preference, all that stuff, which I clearly, as you hear me describe it, don't understand it well. So I am joined by a special guest today, someone who is actively going through this process, interviewing currently, and hopefully matching here in the next several months to residency. So I'm sure I'll learn a lot and also feel very old as I better understand what it's like for the current generation of medical students. So instead of hearing me blabber for any second longer, we'll get right to our interview. We are excited today to be joined by Kenedy Dawson. Kenedy is a fourth-year medical student at Kansas City University, where she is completing her Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine degree. She is also pursuing a master's in business administration with a focus on healthcare leadership. Also, she holds a master's in public health from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Kenedy is passionate about leadership in medicine, mentorship, and medical education. Currently, she is applying to anesthesiology residency programs and has spent the past 6 months traveling across the country for rotations at various programs. Originally from the Kansas City area, she now resides in Oklahoma City with her husband, Britton, and their golden doodle, Blue. Kenedy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I would also just like to start off by saying that my brother, who's also a physician, also has a golden doodle, also is named Blue, which is
Oh my
pretty
gosh.
crazy. I know
That's
that's the most
amazing.
important thing to talk about right now, but I did have to I did have to share that as it's pretty crazy. So I went through a residency match back in 2013, 2014. It's been a little bit, and things have changed. A few things that have come top of mind for me. One is the fact that a lot, if not all, of people's interviews are virtual. Another is this whole aspect of preference signaling, and I kind of understand it, but I also kind of don't understand it. Run us through maybe what's changed from your perspective, or what's new for the residency match in this season.
Yeah. So I think they've made a couple of changes, and a lot of them have happened post-COVID. So the one that you mentioned first was a lot of the interviews are virtual. There are some specialties that are going back to in-person interviews, a few, but I would say the majority of specialties, and for me as an anesthesia applicant, I have all but one of my interviews are going to be virtual. So you're meeting on Zoom, you're sitting on Zoom for half a day most of the time, and you also are doing the social events via Zoom as well, which is also pretty different from pre-pandemic era. So typically in an in-person interview, they would, take you to dinner, you get to meet the residents, maybe get a tour of the hospital, but now they're doing all of that virtually. We're having kind of happy hour Zoom socials or evening Zoom socials where you're just kind of put in a room and chatting with everyone, which can be a little different. It's, we can talk about kind of the pros and cons because we've made it work. But on top of the virtual, there's also the signaling, like you talked about. That's been a very huge part of the match more recently, especially for anesthesia. And I'm probably going to talk about anesthesia a lot because that's the one I know the best. So,
That's fine. I love it. That's great.
but anesthesia has introduced in the last 2 years, I think this is the second year they've done it, where they do gold signals and silver signals, which is basically a way to flag your application to a program. And if you send them a gold signal, you only get 5 of them. And you're basically telling this program, hey, you're in my top 5. Like, I really, really want to be here. It's really good for trying to get interviews. It kind of flags your application in the midst of a larger pile that they're having to go through. And then you also do the same with silvers, but you only get 10 silvers. And that kind of tells them you're in my top 15, which there's some strategy with that because do you want to tell a program that they're like send a silver signal, tell them that you're in my top 15, but not quite my top five. And every program responds differently to that. So that's been pretty complicated this year because you just never know what a program's going to do. But every specialty does different things like that.
That is interesting because you're right. It's a lot of strategy. What if you don't give a program any signaling, but it's your way of like, I don't know, maybe that program doesn't want that for some reason, or maybe that makes them pursue you more because they wanted to put you in the top. It seems like a lot of issues to try to navigate.
Yes, I personally felt like for as an applicant this year, it was incredibly complicated. It was a lot of mind juggling, kind of mind games that I felt like I was playing, which was difficult because I just didn't know what the right answer was, and there probably isn't a correct answer necessarily. But I found that I can maybe count on one hand the amount of programs that I remember that didn't want signals at all. Pretty much everyone in anesthesia this year wanted signals or was accepting them. And essentially, for a pretty competitive specialty like anesthesiology, if you don't send a signal, you're likely not going to get an interview. Your chance was like maybe 1 to 2% at that point.
So if when can you actually signal? I mean, it has to be pre-interview. Can it be post-interview? Can you change? It's basically set it. You can't change it afterwards.
It's set. Yep. So it is when you submit your ERAS application that your signals are final and you cannot change them after that. So it's pre-interview. Really, the only thing you have to go off of is whether if you do a rotation at the program. Some if you do my July and August and September rotations, I was able to go visit before submitting and signaling. And then other than that, it's just social events, open houses that they do via Zoom, and you just try to gather information and do your best and hope for the best.
It's so interesting too, the virtual happy hours and virtual dinners. I mean, I think most people listening to this podcast and you and I both know that sometimes in med school there are gunners. And in a group interview situation, that can also occur where someone's trying to answer every question. And, I just watched Wicked last night, and it kind of reminds me of the beginning when Galinda is trying to get into her. That's like a gunner. If someone wants to know what a gunner's like, that's who that is. So how do you navigate that in a group virtual happy hour? Some person just trying to hog the microphone?
Yeah, I mean that happens. I have seen it. I have, cross fingers, never been that person. I'm not a gunner. Would not classify myself as a gunner. But it has happened. There are some ways that I feel like programs do a good job of mitigating that. I have been in some where you do breakout rooms and there's a smaller group of residents, or maybe, and I've even been to some where it's a one-on-one conversation where I go to a room with one single resident and it's just me and them. But a lot of times they kind of figure out how to mitigate that to give everyone a chance to get their questions answered. And many programs do a presentation as well, which is really, really helpful for open houses or for the social events before Zoom, because it kind of is a way to address those questions before anyone even asks them. So you don't give that person a chance to take over the conversation.
That makes sense. And walk us through because before virtual, you had to, which was pretty stressful because I didn't have any money and I was trying to pay to travel across the country. Some programs covered hotels, most didn't. And was living off student loans and it was pretty bad. So I love that change. But with there being relatively no cost with these virtual interviews, has it caused people to apply to more programs because it's like, well, I can interview at as many as I possibly want to because it's all virtual.
Yeah, I would say that is exactly what's happened. I don't know any people hardly that deny interviews anymore, which I've heard that be a discussion kind of about are we interview hoarding? Is that a problem? Which granted, I understand that. And also being in the applicant perspective, like I don't want to give up any of my interviews either because I'm terrified of not matching. And we all are, even if you do everything right, sometimes the algorithm just doesn't work in your favor. So I would say people are I wouldn't say they're applying to more programs because with the signaling being introduced, people are actually applying to less programs, which was the point of the signaling, because you know that your yield of interviews is going to go way down. So for me, with my example of anesthesia, I was only able to signal 15 programs, and I was able at this point in the cycle, I've gotten 11 interviews from those 15. I haven't gotten a single interview from a non-signal program. And I would say I'm like a pretty normal applicant. I mean, I'm not below average. I'm not like, I didn't get like a 285 on step two, but I'm a good applicant, and and yeah, that's just kind of the way it works now.
Interesting. So, how does it work on the actual interview itself? Do you feel like you get a good sense? And the reason I say that is there has been some research on what is a predictive feature of a residency program that allows for you to be satisfied, in your training. And at least there's one study, one survey study, and I love it because it really what people thought was important on match day was very different from what they thought was important at the end of their PGY1, and it wasn't on where the program was or the prestige. It really was somewhat related to, I think, scheduling a call, but the most predictive thing was the fit, program fit. And that's like a very nebulous thing. I can't really quantify that. It's a gut feeling of how you connect with other people. A lot easier if you're there at a dinner or a happy hour in a day interview. How do you do that in a virtual interview?
Yeah. I have found it very difficult personally, and I think it's a benefit of going and still rotating at programs. I went to 5 different residency programs and did rotations at each of them, which that's a lot. That was a lot, and that kind of almost evened out the expenses of saving money on virtual interviews because I was traveling every month. But in the interviews when I haven't rotated at a program and I'm trying to kind of figure out if I vibe with them, like are these people I could be friends with? It is a lot harder. And I would say the social is more helpful than the interview, in my opinion, because there's a difference in kind of the attitude of the residents. You have to be really, really aware, and I feel like I'm kind of analyzing them at the socials because I'm thinking, okay, are they all hanging out together? Do they look like they're having fun? Does everyone seem tired and kind of worn down? And you're kind of trying to figure out, are the questions that they're answering, do you feel like they're just feeding you lines that like the program director told them, or does it feel sincere? And the more you do, the better you get at kind of fleshing that out a little bit, but it's hard.
It's I can't imagine. I don't envy that situation. I remember a lot of my data that I kind of processed on how to rank was really from not just the social, but the tour of the hospital too, because you would inevitably run across another resident who's on rounds or in the workroom that they weren't prepared necessarily for someone to come by. So you're really seeing them in the moment, and what do they like? They look super unhappy and exhausted, which of course residency is exhausting and you can be unhappy sometimes. That's okay. But it really gives you a better vibe, I think, actually touring and seeing the other residents, even residents from outside of your program, and talking to them about what's their attitude about. I'm med peds, and I would ask a lot of categorical internal medicine or categorical pediatrics residents, tell me about med peds, and that was always interesting. I'm sure in anesthesia, talking to the surgeons and
Yes.
surgical
Yeah.
subs would be a good data point. Probably they give you some
Hmm.
very honest feedback whether you wanted it or not. But
Yep.
that's hard. I can't. I don't envy that. Do you find a lot of people are going to visit after they interview just to get a sense?
I think so. Yeah. I have a lot of classmates that I have talked to throughout this process that have maybe interviewed somewhere where they didn't rotate and they were very pleasantly surprised. And because of that experience of how much they enjoyed their interview, it kind of moved up on their rank list. And so now they're more motivated to go check out the program and to just go visit it and just see. And a lot of hospitals or a lot of residency programs are really, really good about offering a tour if you can make it, which not everybody can. It's not feasible for everyone, but a lot of them say, "Hey, if you're in town, let us know and we're happy to give you a quick tour," which is nice to do.
Totally. That's great. A great opportunity to take it if you can afford it. I know what really limited my interviews was just cost and travel. I trained, went to med school at University of Tennessee. It was very hard for me to get to West Coast programs. And so I just didn't get to go, which I'm glad I ended up matching where I matched up. But I like that it's more accessible now, but there's some other things we've already talked about. So walk us through a little bit of why anesthesia? Why did you choose anesthesia? Now, this is probably a question you're getting on every interview. But walk us through that and what's your,
Oh yeah, I'm prepared for this one.
yeah, you're really prepared. And what are you wanting to do long term with that training?
Yeah, so I did not realize I wanted to do anesthesia until about the kind of beginning of my third year. I had kind of focused my preclinical time just exploring a lot of different specialties. I was interested in sports medicine, and so I was thinking about avenues to do that preclinical. And I realized when I started my third year, my very first rotation was general surgery. And I was terrified because, the general surgery as a third year, fresh off step one, that's just horrifying. And I was like, I'm going to break sterile field. I'm going to like, nobody's going to like me. Everyone's going to yell at me. And I fell in love with the OR during that rotation. And it kind of gave me a crisis of, oh, wait, do I want to be a surgeon? Do I want to be an anesthesiologist? Whatever I do, it has to be in the OR. That was kind of my first step to making my way towards anesthesia. And I had a really, really good general surgery attending who kind of saw that I was enjoying myself a lot and recognized that in me and encouraged me to, go chat with the anesthesiologist before our cases would start and ask him about what his quality of life was like. So he was really helpful in that because he told me on my second day, he said, "You are enjoying this way too much." He said, "Not everyone actually likes the OR, so you need to like consider what kind of specialties you can do to be in here." He's like, "Because you seem like you like it a lot." And I was like, "I do, you're right. Okay, now I have to rethink everything." And so I scheduled an anesthesia elective pretty quickly after that because I knew about it. I didn't know the full scope of what they did, and I started learning more about it. I love the procedures. I love how hands-on it is. I love that it is kind of instant gratification, and I can see a problem with a patient's like blood pressure, heart rate, and I can fix it just like that. That feels very satisfying to me. And I also felt like I really enjoyed the short timing but high impact patient interaction. So I don't have long term patients. I'm not going to, follow them for years and years. But in that, few minutes that I do have, I feel like it's a very high impact time. And I got a lot of, trying to think of the word, a lot. It felt really meaningful to me to be able to, see someone drift off to sleep and tell them, hey, we're going to take really good care of you. That to me was like the best feeling. And I hadn't found that in any other specialty. And so the more I learned, the more I loved it. As soon, like after day one of my rotation, I was sold. I was like, yep, this is it. I found my people.
And it's cool. So I'm not a proceduralist, but I do think I love all the stuff you said. And anesthesia is a great mixture of great physiology
Hmm.
and the procedural hands-on stuff is cool. I mean,
Yeah.
as a med peds doctor, I have great physiology and there's a lot of interesting issues that can walk through the door, but it isn't an instant gratification thing. In fact, it's normally
Hmm.
quite the opposite.
Yes.
I'm glad there's people in all walks in healthcare, but it's very cool. I think during the conversation of anesthesia versus surgery, I'm sure that was a very interesting one you had with lots of different colleagues.
Oh, yes, yes. I think it was actually a very difficult decision because I worried that I was going to choose anesthesia just because I was scared of what surgery residency would be like. And I didn't want that to be the reason that I chose. And so I had so many conversations with so many people. And what it ended up coming down to for me was okay, when I picture myself as a tired third year resident and I'm on call and it's 2 a.m., what am I going to wake up and at least tolerate doing and be like, okay, I still am interested in learning this. And for me, that was not, doing a lap chole at 2 in the morning or learning how to get, suture more efficiently. That was not what I could see myself doing and loving, but figuring out how to, make sure my patient's more comfortable to kind of fine tune my anesthetic based on, their past medical history, that was something that I was like, yep, I can do that. That will feel satisfying and I can do that even on the hard days.
Makes a lot of sense. And what is, as far as trends go, I know certain specialties are becoming more competitive, some are less competitive in the last few years. Where is anesthesia on that?
Anesthesia since COVID has increasingly gotten more competitive. I would say every year gets more and more competitive. It's a scary world out there right now for anesthesia applicants. I think the match rate has been decreasing every single year because there are just more and more and more people that are realizing what it has to offer. The secret is out. That's kind of the joke of the specialty. Everyone, all the attendings are like, "Oh, the secret's out. Everyone knows." So it's kind of, I think people really like the work-life balance. They like the procedures and the, variety that you get. And it's essentially shift work in a lot of ways. And I think since COVID, a lot of people are leaning more towards specialties that you don't take a lot of your work home with you. So that's really nice.
Makes sense. I will give a shout out to a previous guest, Dr. Brian Carmody, who has an amazing blog, The Sheriff of Sodium, and he goes over a lot of these trends. That's how I keep up a little bit with the what's going on with certain specialties and match rates. And as you mentioned earlier, as a DO student, tell us what going through the match is like as a DO student versus an allopathic student. Is there much difference? Walk us through what that experience is like.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it's been similar, but in a lot of ways it's been very different. And I think I don't think it's a great idea to for a DO student to not be prepared for just the differences that are naturally going to occur. Because I feel like I will be just as well trained as any MD. I feel very confident in my abilities compared to any MD. But my experience with being an osteopathic medical student has kind of given me both advantages and disadvantages. So I don't have a home program at my institution, which is a big disadvantage for anesthesia. I didn't have a program director to, get involved with during preclinical. We had an anesthesia interest group or a club, but I had to, connect with program directors and get into that world kind of on my own with my own networking. And that's pretty difficult. And although anesthesia is a very DO friendly specialty, I have had zero issues with anyone asking me about being an osteopathic medical student. Everyone is thrilled to have like both the DOs and MDs alike, which has been very refreshing. But the match rate for DOs is substantially lower for anesthesia than it is for MDs. I think the most recent NRMP data, you might have to fact check me on this. I think the MD match rate for anesthesia was in the 80s, maybe 85 or somewhere around there. And the DO match rate was, I believe, 58% for anesthesia. So it's a marked difference. And I think for me, my experience has just been I felt like I needed to do more rotations than the average MD student needed to do in order to kind of beef up my experience and beef up my interview numbers and kind of get my face in front of these programs so that they can meet me and we can get connected and I can see if it's a good fit. So I feel like there's a few extra things I've had to do. I had to take extra board exams. That's no fun. Nobody likes that. I took both the level and step board exams, which is that's essential for an anesthesia applicant and many other specialties, which stank. That was rough years, but
That's rough, and more money and more time. I mean,
yes.
that's no joke. That's no joke.
hmm
And
Yeah.
do you, as far as what struck me recently on the match, is the number of research publications that people have to
Yeah.
do now
hmm
versus when I was going through the match. It is insane. I look at it and I feel like there is no way that I could have matched. I had like
hmm
one, you could call it hopefully barely, if you wanted to really loosen your definition of research. I had one, maybe two in medical school, but now like it's nuts. Like, what's the average for anesthesia as far as research and publications?
I think the average for anesthesia was somewhere between 2 and 4. It's actually pretty low compared to other specialties.
Okay, still, that's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost an expectation that you're going to come out with some sort of publication from med school, at least one. It's very rare to have to meet someone In my, like, at least in my experience, it's very rare to meet people who truly have zero publications. It's just, it doesn't happen anymore. I don't have very many. I mean, I have two like poster publications that are, so I don't have a paper necessarily, but I chose to do my master's of business administration instead of a lot of extra research time. So I picked and chose.
Yeah, to me, that makes way more sense. It is way more valuable. Actually, it's a great transition. I was going to ask you about that. Walk us through. So you've had a lot of educational experience already. It sounds like from your intro, pursuing your MBA as someone who has a little bit of a business background too in medicine as well. I love meeting people who are actively pursuing this because we need so many of us in healthcare to be smarter on the business side. But walk us through why you chose to get your MBA or pursuing your MBA.
Yeah, this is a residency interview question I get all the time. So you're firing them off. I'm prepared.
Oh, great. Awesome. Softball.
Yeah, it's a good softball. So my school, the reason I chose to attend Kansas City University is because they had a dual degree program, and I was really interested in doing that even before medical school started. So what I'm going to be able to do is I will graduate with both my DO and my MBA in 4 years. I haven't had to add any time. I've done a lot of extra work, but both degrees done in the same 4 years was really important to me because I didn't want to delay graduating anymore. Um, Part of why I chose to do it was because I wasn't sure what specialty I wanted to do, but I thought there's a lot of specialties in which a private practice would be feasible, or, me owning my own practice. That's something that I was interested in, and I wanted to feel knowledgeable about that. And in doing healthcare leadership, that's what my concentration is for the MBA now. And now that I'm doing anesthesia, those goals have somewhat shifted, not necessarily to owning a private practice, which if I owned a private like anesthesia group, that'd be great. I'd be happy to do that. But combined with my master's in public health, which has a leadership and practice concentration, I really want to set myself up for like residency program leadership, department leadership, hospital administration, somewhere where I can kind of work my way up into those leadership roles and have more, just a better, like, well-rounded education. I want to be able to sit in meetings where they're talking about budgets and understand what we're talking about and have some background knowledge so that we can get more physicians at these tables instead of just people who have the business knowledge but don't have the patient care aspect. And I really felt like it was important, and I wanted to be that person that could kind of merge those two.
I love that. We need more physicians in leadership positions making decisions. I mean, just it's true. And you see it so much now. I love you said the thing about practice ownership
Mm-hmm.
at at least at Panacea. We've supported a lot of physicians wanting to maintain their independence and either
Mm-hmm.
build or grow or buy a practice. It's just so I think a lot of people don't see that as a possibility, but I feel like it's
Mm-hmm.
gaining more and more traction as people are kind of
I think so.
tired of some of the other practice settings. And there was all this consolidation over the last 20 years. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like, and maybe it's my own echo chamber, it might be
Mm-hmm.
information echo chamber, but I feel like there's more physicians now trying to go out on their own and maintain their own independence and practice the way they want to practice. Are you seeing that too?
I think so. I mean, I think it's kind of hard in anesthesia because I think typically, it's either you're in a private practice, it's contracted to a hospital, or you're in academics. That's kind of the things that I have had the most experience with, in terms of seeing how these practices run. But even in anesthesia, I'm seeing people start their own private group that is like mobile anesthesia. So they go to dental offices or plastic surgery offices or dermatology, and provide anesthesia for, minor in-office procedures. So I think that a lot of physicians are heading that way just so that they can create the life that they want and practice the way they want.
Have control over their life. That makes sense. And what another I want to go back to the match real quick is the what's used to be called the scramble, now called SOAP, I think, if I'm keeping up with this right. And so for those listening that don't know what we're talking about, basically, if we kind of walk through this process, which is a culmination of 4 or 5 years of undergrad, maybe post-bac, 4 years of med school, maybe you've got a PhD as well. So potentially a decade of life and hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loans like I had. And it really culminates into the application for residency, in the getting residency interview offers, going to the interview, submitting your rank list, putting in the computer, and then the program submit their rank list to a computer, and then after the algorithm goes, a few seconds later, out pops everyone's match. And unfortunately, there are some who do not. And back at least when before SOAP, it was called Scramble, and it was like perfect name because it was a scramble. You just were like on the phones and emails, and your dean was trying to help, and you're trying to find programs that had spots for you. It was chaos, from what I understand. It sounds like they try to clean that up with SOAP. Walk us through what happens now for those people who might not match in that first day.
Yeah, so the way that match week works, it's a whole week. And how it works is on Monday, you get the email that tells you whether or not you matched. So it doesn't tell you where, it gives you no information. You just get an email that either says, "Congratulations, you have matched," or "We're sorry you did not match into any position." So once you get that, if you get that "We're sorry you did not match," you basically have about 2 hours to cry, and then after that, you have to revamp your entire application because you're essentially going to go through the entire residency application process once a day until you get an offer. So imagine you are there on Monday, you got that dreaded email that nobody wants that says you didn't get a position. What's going to happen is you're going to get phone calls from your school. I kind of picture it as the situation room. Everyone's calling, it's very much a scramble. That's still very accurate. You're going to rewrite your personal statement. You're going to, revamp your application, adjust any things that you need to adjust, and then you're going to look for the SOAP offer like email. I think they send it to you via email. But they're going to show you a list of all of the residency programs in the country that have openings, and that could be any specialty. Now, many of the competitive specialties, like anesthesia last year, I don't think they had a single open spot
Oh, wow.
after the match. So if that were to happen to me, then I probably would either have to apply to intern year position only, a PGY1, and reapply, or I would need to completely change my specialty.
Hmm.
Kind of depends on what is right for you in that moment. And it's a very tough decision because,
Yeah.
emotions are high. But
Yeah.
you're going to look at all those openings. And then on Tuesday morning, you're going to submit your application to whatever programs you want. By a few hours later, those programs will review the applications, and then they will call you for a phone interview in the afternoon. I think they're on the phone. We'll maybe. I'm not sure that they do them on Zoom. Not positive, but they'll call you.
Makes sense. It's probably easier to just call than set up these, I would guess.
Yeah, that's what I assume. And then at the end of that day, you either get an offer or you don't. And if you get an offer, you got to take it. And if you don't, you do it again on Wednesday. And you just rinse repeat every day until hopefully by Friday you have a spot. And for all of those that matched on Friday, you get your email or your envelope that tells you where you're going and what specialty. Some people dual apply. So some people don't know what specialty they're going to be until Friday, but that's kind of how it works now. It's horribly stressful. I mean, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy.
Yeah, it's stressful. I knew people went through the scramble, and it seems like it's a lot more organized now as opposed to just it was totally nuts. And it's funny how each school does the actual match day ceremonies. Our school was we got an actual physical envelope, and then we all went to like our, people or friends or family that came with us, and we open and there's tears or whatever. But other schools, like where I did my residency program, they would go one by one in front of the entire student body. You got to play a walk-up song, which was kind of cool, but in front of everyone, and they would broadcast it throughout the entire medical center so everyone could see. And you would open the envelope and have to read it in front of everybody. And like for a lot of people, that's great, right? But I mean, to me, that is absolutely horrible because, like you said, you could have applied to anesthesia and surgery, and you wanted anesthesia, and all of a sudden you have to tell everyone you're doing surgery. Like again, if you're listening and you didn't go through a literal decade of going through this to and have it all rely on a single envelope, having that broadcast in front of hundreds or 1,000 people is crazy to me. But it's their tradition, and I guess I don't know.
I've seen that. Thank goodness my school doesn't do that because that is terrifying to me. I mean, it's such a vulnerable moment because so many things can go wrong. Even if you get your specialty, what if you get your fifth choice? I'm sure it's like a good program, but maybe you're going to be disappointed, and that's just out there. Oh, it gives me, yeah, gives me the heebie-jeebies. I can't.
And for, I don't know, it's probably what I see, at least in the last couple of years. There's a lot of amazing videos, feel good videos of people reacting and pictures, but I always immediately flip to the other of there's so many people that would never like, I don't know, that's a different era too than when I was there was Instagram, I think, I don't know, but no one was doing that kind of social media on it. So I I feel for those people who it's not the best day of their life, and seeing everyone. I'm glad people are happy, of course. I don't want to ruin it for other people, but you know what I mean? Like, is that a thing?
I know it is. It's a thing. Yeah, I mean, it's a thing because, everyone wants that big reaction moment. Like everyone's going to be filming you and like your family now. And so you want to have that great moment to be able to share with your family and friends, but you definitely run the risk of, filming it and then realizing that all you see is like the disappointment on your face, which I've seen people be vulnerable and post that too, and I've seen how they reacted to getting, their third choice. And just as kind of like an opposite to the typical match videos, you say that like it's okay if it doesn't go exactly the way you thought, like it'll work out, is kind of the message, which is really good message. But it's a little stressful because I think, I mean, I have a decently sized following on my platform on Instagram, and I know that if I don't post pretty quickly on match day, that everyone that follows me is going to assume that I didn't match. And that's kind of, I mean, it's I know a lot of people listening probably are going to think, oh, you shouldn't care, but it's hard. I mean, I've worked my entire life to be a doctor, and this has been my dream since I was 6 years old. This is like a culmination of years and years of my goals and something I want very badly. And for there to be a risk that I can't get that and then I have to share that with 13,000 people, that just like, ooh, that could be really hard. And I don't look forward to that. I obviously hope for the best, but it's tough, I think, with all the internet presence that people have.
Yes, a lot more pressure. Well, and knowing what I know about you and this conversation or program, would be very fortunate to have you train with them. So they will be very lucky wherever you match. I had a couple last questions. One is, if you could change anything about the match process, what would it be? I don't know if you've put any thought into that at all. If not, that's okay. You are in the midst of interviewing, and people maybe throwing you curveballs. But is there anything that you would say this probably would be great to change?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, honestly. I think as of right now, I think the cost should be very different. The cost of applications is insane. I mean, people are going to pay what they're going to pay, but it just is so expensive to send in as many applications as you feel comfortable. I think that's like the thing that impacted me the most. I also think I wish that the match results came out faster. I mean, I feel like if we submit our rank list, it shouldn't take weeks and weeks for the results to get to us. I wish we did it a little quicker. I'm sure there's a reason that someone out there could explain to me, but I think it should cost less. I mean, I applied to 70 programs and I spent like just under $2,000 because it gets more expensive the more you add, which is supposed to be a deterrent, but it's not because I'm going to spend any amount of money to secure my
Yes,
livelihood. So
yes,
it just is not, it's not going to matter.
I agree. And I have talked about this to a lot of groups. It makes no sense. Like, I know why it happens, because you have a company that can make money off of the application. And like you said, it's a decade of your life. Are you just not going to spend the extra $50 to apply for that extra program? Like, no, I'm going to save $50 and risk not matching and doing the thing that I've just worked at for 10 years and spending. I mean, I had $250,000 of student loans at this point when I was interviewing or applying. And so it's like you're getting taken advantage of. It feels like that. I like to think the best in people, and they're not trying to do that to medical students, but it really is hard it was hard for me to stomach that cost. And it's hard for me to see, oh, the more I apply, the more it costs. And that is what there's no other product that I can think of off the top of my head where the more you order, the more you spend instead of it being less. And just doesn't feel good.
It doesn't, and I knew when I applied to anesthesia this year, this current cycle, that if I, applied outside of my 15 signals, my chance of interviews was, 1 to 2%, because that's just the way it's working now. But I just couldn't stomach the idea of not, giving it everything I had. And at this point, I'm also hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And I thought, well, is this the time to be skimping on what I'm paying? Like, probably not. Like, there are other things that we can save money for, and this is just not going to be one of them. Like, there's no cost. I mean, there is a cost that's too high, but I was going to do whatever it took, because if I matched, then great. But if I didn't match in March, and if I don't match, I want to be able to tell myself, well, I did everything that I could have done, which was really important to a lot of people. I think will feel that way.
And I think that's every year. Thousands and thousands of us aren't going to just skimp on the last 5, 10, 15 contracts. And then I used to do a depressing thing during noon conference in residency sometimes is calculate how much
Mhm.
interest was accruing on my debt during that noon
Oh no.
conference. It is not a healthy thing to do, but I did it anyway.
No.
But part of that, the reality is these little hoops you got to jump through with applications, the whole interview process in general. It's just more debt if you're living off debt like I was. I would love it if they made that cheap and made it more affordable so we didn't have to continue to incur for the debt. So I totally second that. I know you're busy, so I wanted to ask one last question. And we ask all of our podcast guests this, and the question is, what is one thing that you have changed your mind about recently? And the reason I like this question is because we've never consumed more information than now. We consume so much news and information all the time. And does it actually inform us to make new decisions and make new stances, or do we just reaffirm the things we already believe? And so you've gone through a lot over the last 4 years and you've consumed a ton of information, obviously. And is there anything recently that you have changed your mind on? It doesn't have to be medical related at all.
Oh, that's such a good question. This is great interview prep, because I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before.
They're going to hear it and now ask people that.
This might be a hot take. I don't think that all hospital leadership is bad. Like, I think we kind of weaponize, not maybe not weaponize is the wrong word, but I think that we all kind of look at, department chairs and admin and, leadership in our various areas, and we all just think, oh, they're not helping us at all. But I feel like in my very, very limited experience with, some hospital leadership in academic centers, and, things where there's hundreds of people that are being led by a small group, I haven't necessarily, I've seen some bad decisions, but I think that a lot of good can come from it. And so I feel like my general attitude towards like hospital leadership in that context has changed over the past 4 years, if that makes sense. Hopefully that's,
It does make sense. I'd say it is a hot take. I appreciate a hot take.
it is a hard take. It is. And maybe that's the MBA talking, I don't know. I think
Yeah,
there's a method to people. Like, I think there's a lot of reasons that things have to happen. And so things are very nuanced. And I think the more I learn, the less I know. And so
hmm
I feel like a lot of things that I didn't think were nuanced in the past, I now think are very nuanced and are much more difficult than I ever realized.
Makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. I agree. It's a lot of us versus them weaponization,
Hmm.
right? It's doctors
Yes.
versus leadership. Sometimes
Hmm.
people are playing on both teams, but there can be a lot of good decisions made. In my experience, I think there can be really good hospital leaders, but they turn over so quickly that it can
Hmm.
really be tough when reforms and changes are made, but then the person who started them leaves 2 to 3 years later, and someone else is going to come for 2 to 3. Um, so I think it's tough, right? It's a tough industry for them as well. And I hope that people like you get into leadership as well because we need more physicians in those spots. So, best of luck. I can't wait to hear about what's going on. Where can people find out more about you? And you mentioned your platform already. Tell the audience where they can find more about you.
Yes, you can find me on mostly on Instagram. I do have a TikTok, but I'm not as active. So on Instagram, my handle is at Kenedy Dawson. So KenedydDawson. So I am posting all the time about what fourth year is like. I post about, things that I wish I knew about medical school, study tips, inside look in my residency application process. All of that you can find on Instagram and follow me and we can hang out and chat over there.
That's awesome. Well, student Dr. Dawson, soon to be Dr. Dawson, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wow, what a great interview and conversation with student doctor, soon to be Dr. Dawson. It was eye-opening in some ways. It was a reminder in a lot of ways, brought back a lot, maybe a little bit of PTSD from my own experience with residency applications. I think it's important to note to anyone listening that is not familiar with what it's like to go through the match of just how expensive it really is. I'm glad she shared, was very open and authentic and vulnerable about the cost and debt it takes just to apply. Um, you know, I think it is sad that there's thousands and thousands of medical students who have already paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to go through the training and are kind of put through the ringer on costs just to go through the next hoop. Every hoop costs money and costs money and costs money. For those people that are already in lots of debt, to have to take out more is, in some ways, you're a little numb to it when you're in school, but as it accumulates interest, especially during school and a residency, it can be really overwhelming. And I hope that the system tries to continue to put pressure on those groups to result in less debt for trainees, not just in medicine, but also our dental and veterinary colleagues. Anything we can do to create less debt for the doctor, I think results in a doctor that is more likely to be able to practice in a way that they want to. And I think in that case is better for patients. If you have less stressed doctors, they tend to stay in their job longer. They don't bounce around as much, don't have to. And so patients have more continuity. There's more institutional knowledge gained by the clinician, and I think everybody benefits. Um, it is also clear to me that I'm old. I think things have changed in some ways in the last 10 years. Some things haven't changed, but it's going to be really hard to try to figure out what is the fit with you in a program via a Zoom. I do not envy that position. As I said to her, I feel for those applicants trying to understand how they connect with other trainees and the program director and the hospital just by a Zoom. I mean, hopefully there's ways people can get on campus and meet these people in 3 dimensions and see the facilities, because that's really, I think, the best way, but it's not possible for everybody. Either way, best of luck to student Dr. Dawson and all of you out there listening who are going through the match or will be going through the match process. And hopefully you learned something today, also built some community. And I know at Panacea, we love helping those people who are going through the match with a lot of resources on our website. But I will wrap it up there. Appreciate you all joining us for another episode of the podcast for doctors by doctors, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us on another episode of the podcast for doctors by doctors. You can catch us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and all the other major podcasting platforms. If you enjoyed this episode or learned anything here today, please take a moment to give us a rating and subscribe so that you don't miss a single episode release. As always, thanks for listening. And the next time you see a doctor, maybe you should prescribe this podcast. See you next time.